Some nights split a life clean down the middle. You go to sleep as the woman who keeps the peace, and you wake up as the woman who finally says no. I'm a mother from the generation that stretches $1, keeps the casserole warm, and swallows her hurt for the sake of family. But that winter evening, with crystal glasses chiming and eyes judging the lace on my curtains, my own child leaned back and asked with a smile that did not belong to the boy I raised, "How does it feel to be completely useless, Mom?" I didn't shatter. I didn't even blink. I smiled right back and said, "It feels like never having to pay your rent again." Forks froze in midair. Silence poured over the room thicker than gravy. If you've ever paid in quiet your time, your savings, your knees, for someone else's image, you already know a single sentence can open every locked door. Mine did. I am Ellen Parker, 59, a widow who still sets 2 plates out of habit. My backyard carries the scent of wisteria, the vine I planted the week my son took his first breath. Now a purple canopy that remembers more than I do. In spring it blushes like a shy bride. In winter it grips the trellis the way I've gripped this family, quiet, stubborn, unwilling to let go. The house creaks in the good places, the ones that say, I've made a life here, a dent in the couch where stories were read. A scuff on the doorframe where I penciled growth spurts. I keep my teacher's planner, though I retired. Old habits die slow. I write little notes to myself, call the pharmacy, thaw the chili water, the vine. Routine is a kind of prayer. It kept me steady when grief came, when bills came, when the world kept asking more of me. And it kept me soft, perhaps too soft, when my son began to ask more too. When Ryan was little, Sundays began with a stumble and a grin. He'd march in with a glass of orange juice. He'd squeezed himself pulp thick as hope, half of it sloshed over his pajama cuffs. "For you, Mom," he'd say, presenting it like a trophy, as proud as if he'd bottled sunlight. I'd sip seeds and sweetness and tell him it was perfect, because it was. He'd lean into me at the kitchen table, elbows on math worksheets, pencil smudges like brave little bruises. Those mornings smelled like toast pencil shavings and the citrus glow of his wanting to give. Children don't have much to offer except everything, and I took it carefully like a fragile gift. I used to think love is a full glass. Now I know it's whatever remains when most of it spills, and you still smile and drink and say, "Thank you, baby." I paid for tenderness in hours. A public school salary will teach you arithmetic the hard way, 29 kids, 3 lesson plans, and a stack of papers taller than a teapot. I graded until the blue lines blurred, then tutored after school for $20. Ahead fractions, verbs, the periodic table taped to my brain. I learned every sale day at the grocery how to stretch ground turkey into chili that lasted 2 dinners, and a lunch how to make a winter coat. Lived 2 extra seasons with new buttons and stubborn faith. My hands remember chalk dust and dishwater, the twin baptisms of a working mother. I wasn't heroic, I was consistent. I kept the heat at 68, the lights off in empty rooms, the mortgage paid 1 cautious month at a time. When you don't have much, you turn what you do have into a ritual, a pot simmering, a light left on for the boy you love. A promise kept even when no one's looking. The night his father died, the house learned a new silence. It wasn't cruel, it was careful, like the hush in a church when someone kneels. Ryan was 8. He didn't cry at the wake. He held my hand so tight my fingers tingled, and later sat with me on the back steps beneath the baby wisteria. "Don't worry, Mom," he said, small voice pitched like a vow. "I'm going to take care of you. Children make covenants with the stars because they believe the sky is listening." I tucked that sentence into my wallet next to the insurance cards and grocery lists and carried it through the long administrative winter of lost death certificates. Frozen pipes the first solo tax season, when the furnace clanged, when the car coughed. When I stood alone at school concerts, I touched that sentence in my mind. It warmed me like a secret heater. I didn't need him to keep it then. I just needed to believe we were promising each other something sacred. He grew into the promise in the ways young men do unevenly then all at once. A tassel swung, cameras flashed, and my boy crossed a stage in borrowed robes to shake hands with a future he'd earned. Engineer, such a square, handsome word. I clapped until my palms stung, spotted him scanning the crowd for me, and raised my hand like a lighthouse. Later, over barbecue, pulled pork on paper plates, he said, "Thank you, Mom. Without you, I'd be nothing." I tucked that sentence beside the other one. A mother's purse is where she keeps her breath. He found work that first summer. He found pride. He still came by on Sundays, sometimes with laundry, sometimes just his appetite, and helped me trim the wisteria before it swallowed the gutter. I told myself the balancing had begun. My years of giving traded now for his years of standing. I believed very simply and very deeply that every sacrifice would come home to me with interest. Then he met Madison. Pretty in the way money teaches you to be, pretty neutral colors, expensive understatement, a smile that could frost glass. She walked into my kitchen, and my favorite bowl became vintage, my curtains charming, my china authentic. Words like that sound like compliments until you taste the aftertone. I stirred chili and watched Ryan watch her, watched his shoulders square in a new way, watched him mirror a world that had never learned my name. Nothing was wrong exactly. It's just that my modest house shrank a size when she looked around it. There are women who float through rooms and turn them into showrooms. The rest of us stand there and clutch our dish towels like passports. I told myself to be kind. He was in love, and I remembered love, how it reupholsters the ordinary, how it tells you a future in a voice that sounds like a sale you can't afford to miss. That first dinner with her family, I kept my tongue behind my teeth and salt out of my soup. I'm good at quiet. It's a talent teachers share with librarians and nurses, the art of swallowing what you'd like to say. Madison laughed about summering upstate, about a club with a wait list like scripture. Ryan laughed too, a shade higher than his usual. I passed the cornbread, counted my breaths, and took mental notes the way I always do. Who made room at the table, who didn't. Later, he washed dishes with me. Sleeves rolled bubbles bright the way he did when he was 15. What do you think he asked, eager as a boy with a new sketch? She's very polished, I said, and left it there. I slept that night with my jaw clenched and dreamed of my kitchen wearing pearls. You can love your child and still recognize that some storms don't make a sound until they're already in the house. Chelsea came next, 2 syllables that glitter if you've never written a rent check. They toured a place with a balcony and a view that looked like a postcard trying to impress itself. He sent photos, white walls, high windows, a faucet that curved like a promise. We can see the river, he wrote, as if the water would help with the bills. I wanted to be happy, wanted to wrap their dream in tissue paper and tie it with twine. But my stomach did that teacher's trick where it tightens before a pop quiz. Numbers don't flirt, they add heat, electric, internet. The kind of groceries you buy when your friends come over with glossy coats. I told myself not to meddle. I told myself the world had room for his confidence. But that night I walked through my small house, turning off lights, and felt the wisteria brush the window like fingers asking a question I wasn't ready to answer. He came on a Sunday with that look the one kids get when they're about to ask the grown-up version of a favor. Mom, he started, not quite meeting my eyes, the rent's $3,000. I can cover 2. Could you help with 1,000? Just for a year, the lullaby of poor decisions. My heart did what hearts do. It reached for him before my head had buckled its seatbelt. I asked the questions good mothers ask. What about something smaller? What about waiting? What about honesty with the people whose opinions you're trying to finance? His answers were hopeful little arrows that missed the target but kept flying. I thought about braces I'd paid for shoes bought on layaway the night he promised to take care of me under a baby vine. I said yes to my son and no to my fear, and the sound those words made was softer than wisdom and louder than math. There was one condition, and it didn't come from me. Please don't tell Madison, he said, voice low, like we were bargaining with fate. She needs to think I've got this. Needs, think, got this. 3 perfectly harmless words that when braided together become a rope you can hang yourself with. I stared at the dish towel in my hands and saw a flag I hadn't agreed to wave. Secrets can feel like protection when you're wrapping them around someone you love. They can also feel like erasure. I thought of the girl in my kitchen saying authentic like it meant almost. And I thought of my son, still the boy who carried me orange juice with pulp. I said yes to his condition because I wanted to be the soft place he landed. I didn't understand yet that soft places can swallow you. I told myself it was temporary, a bridge over a single winter. Bridges are for crossing, not living on. The first transfer felt like a kindness performed in a well-lit room. I wrote the amount in my planner, 1,000 due on the first tidy as a lesson objective. I moved a couple of bills to later dates, skipped the sale on boots I'd been eyeing, and told my knees we could wait on the good therapy until spring. Just 12 times I whispered to the wisteria, as if a plant could keep me honest. I slept well that night, like a woman who had done a good thing with clear boundaries. In the morning, I packed chili into freezer containers, called the pharmacy for the cheaper generic, and put on lipstick before the mirror, because small vanities help you pretend you are not cutting pieces from yourself. On day 3, a text arrived, heart emoji photo of the view. Couldn't have done it without you. Gratitude is a kiss on the forehead. I touched the screen like it was warm. I told myself again that I was fine. In the 2nd month, I canceled the senior gym. I loved the one with the warm pool and music from my decade. I told the girl at the desk that my knees were fine and I'd be back in spring. Though spring was a lie, I sold myself at a discount. I folded my swimsuit into the top shelf like a retired flag and drove home with the radio off to hear the math. 1,000 out means something else. It must stop fresh berries, the nice coffee, the small luxury of an Uber on icy days. I taught myself to walk, like a woman who doesn't need rails. I made peace with stairs, by counting blessings between landings. When the bill came for the dentist, I pushed it to a later week and wrote a bright star beside it. So I wouldn't forget I was a responsible person. Responsibility is heavy. You carry it correctly, or it hurts you in new places. Mother's Day should smell like cinnamon and church flowers. Mine smelled like cumin and waiting. I started the chili before noon, the good pot, the one that holds applause. I ironed my best tablecloth because respect is something you set out even when no one's earned it lately. 2 o'clock, 3, 4. I kept tasting, kept turning the burner lower, kept arranging the napkins like a promise I could still keep. At 5, he called to say Madison's family surprised her with brunch reservations, and he was so sorry, the kind that evaporates before it hits the plate. I said it was fine and meant none of it. I ate at the table I had dressed for company and washed the dishes twice, because soap is what you use when forgiveness won't lather. That night, the wisteria clung to the trellis while the wind pushed, and I understood that holding on can look noble from the street and foolish from the kitchen. The messages changed their temperature. Gratitude cooled into logistics. Can you move it up to the 30th? This month, he wrote, as if we were colleagues routing an invoice, not blood keeping blood afloat. No, please, sometimes no. Love you often just the economy of need. I stared at the numbers on my banking app until the digits turned into little doors closing. I tried to learn the online transfer thing, but my thumbprint would not cooperate, and my patience, already stretched thin, frayed. I'll go to the bank, first thing I texted with both pride and apology. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji, mercy, the kind that saves time but not feelings. I scheduled a ride to the branch, stood in line, with people clutching paychecks like life preservers, and told the teller my account number from memory. You're very prompt, she said kindly. I smiled as if promptness were a prize, and not just the last thing I owned that I could still control. I told myself stories to keep the air warm. It's just a bridge. It's building their start the way I built his. It's 12 payments, not a life sentence. I reminded myself how scared I'd been the first year alone. How one unexpected bill can make you believe in ghosts. How sometimes help is a love letter with numbers. I stacked reasons like firewood interviews. Take time, marriages need stability. Dreams are delicate when new. I promised my body we'd circle back, that the pool could wait, that the good shoes could last another winter. If I added gel inserts and stubbornness, a year is nothing. I said the way women say it, about pain we've made a home for. I folded the calendar pages as if time could be tricked by neatness. Belief, when it's generous, can pass for wisdom. When it's blind, it passes for survival until you turn on the light and see what you've bumped into. The second year began the way a rerun does familiar lines. Same laugh track, you already know the cliffhanger. The first of the month arrived with its little drumbeat in my chest. I moved the money and moved the goalposts. Summer would be easier, fall would be fairer, the new rays would make room for the truth to come out without anyone losing face. Ryan's texts arrived late and brief. Sunday visits drifted into another time. I swept the porch, watered the vine, resisted the urge to scroll his life through Madison's filter. That's a special kind of hunger, the one that wants to be sure your sacrifice is feeding something other than pride. I told myself to be patient, the way the wisteria is patient winding, waiting for a place to hold. Patience is a virtue until it becomes an alibi. When the anniversary of my first transfer passed, with no acknowledgement, I baked a small cake and served it to myself. I sang nothing. I made a wish anyway. I decided to bring bagels and a hello. I took the bus to Chelsea, climbed the marble steps that shine because someone else polishes them, and rang the bell with a paper bag warm in my arms. Madison opened the door in silk and surprise shaped like annoyance. "Oh," she said, "Ryan's out." The hallway smelled like money and lemon cleaner. I offered to wait. She said friends were coming. The bagels in my hands suddenly weighed the same as my first sewing machine, as my wedding china boxed and stored. I said another time, polite, like a woman refusing a coat she can't afford. The door closed softly, the expensive kind of rejection. I stood there long enough to be part of the decor, then walked to the bus stop with my back straight, because dignity is muscle memory. I ate a sesame bagel on the bench plain, and it crumbled into my lap like something trying not to be a metaphor. After that, I started recognizing the click in his voice, the one that means a call is over before the word goodbye has a chance to show up. Gotta run in a meeting. She needs me sentences that stacked like folding chairs. I kept mine short to match. It's a strange courtesy to shrink your needs so they fit someone else's schedule. The phone would go silent and the room would roar. I learned to put the kettle on immediately after we hung up, so the whistle could occupy the space where panic wants to build a nest. Panic likes quiet. Tea is louder than people think. I practiced saying love you even when the line had already died, just to keep the muscle from forgetting how. Some weeks, I texted a photo of the wisteria, the only proof I had. That time still turned into color. He'd heart it hours later. Hearts are easy. Listening is hard. My doctor wrote a prescription for the kind of relief you have to budget for. $300 a month is a number that sits in your purse like a dare. She was gentle. You'll feel better. You'll keep your mobility. It's worth it. Worth is a word that has to compete with rent and electricity, and a secret I didn't buy but kept paying for. I slid the paper into my wallet behind the photo of Ryan at 8, with a missing tooth and the bravest eyes. I walked out with a limp. I tried to baptize his character. Pain is honest. It tells you exactly where it lives. I told myself I'd wait until the weather changed, that warmth would loosen what medicine couldn't. At night, I massaged my knees with thrift store lotion, and the kind of prayer that doesn't need words. The bottle said relief. It smelled like lavender and pretending. Pretending gets you through a surprising number of Tuesdays. Diane does not let a wound hide under a cardigan. She poured coffee and slid a slice of lemon loaf across the table. "Where's your gym glow?" she asked, eyes like searchlights that only look kind but always find. I waved it off. She kept looking. Where's your joy? That one landed. Ellen, she said softly. Where is your money going? The question was a key pressed into my palm. I could open a door or pretend I didn't see the lock. I laughed poor camouflage and told her I was saving for a repair. She didn't blink. People who grade papers for 30 years know the difference between a typo and a lie. I changed the subject to whether to school board nonsense, to the latest recipe that stretches chicken. She let me because friendship isn't interrogation. But when I left, she hugged me hard enough to bruise denial. In the car, I counted the cash in my wallet. It felt thinner than my excuses. I rehearsed my alibi until it sounded like truth. Just helping him get started. Only a year, it makes no difference to me. I said them to the mirror, to the kettle, to the cashier, who complimented my thrifted sweater. Each time the words fit a little worse, like a dress you love that won't zip. There's a mercy and honesty I wasn't ready to take. I had built a chapel to the story that I was strong, because I could do this quietly. Quiet women get medals no one sees. Diane texted a heart and a photo of the lake at dusk. I replied with a wisteria bloom and a grocery list. I promised myself I'd tell her soon after the next transfer, after the next thank you that didn't come. We set deadlines for courage like we set timers for casseroles, hoping the ding will save us from opening the door too early and finding everything still raw. Mom, you're making this hard, he said once, the way people say a chair is in the way when they've decided the room belongs to them. It wasn't a scream, it was worse, a sigh that implied I'd failed an etiquette I hadn't been given. I swallowed the impulse to list my small heroics, the freezer meals, the restitched hems, the taxes done right and on time. I'm trying, I said and hated how small it sounded. He exhaled, the call ended, and the word hard hung in the air like a sticky note you can't unsee. I stood at the sink with my hands in dishwater until my fingers wrinkled into raisins. There's a particular shame to realizing you've trained someone to believe your sacrifice is a utility like heat or Wi-Fi, always on, rarely thanked, only noticed when it's gone. I dried the plates slowly, as if care could make them braver. Care is powerful. It is not magic. That night, I sat under the wisteria with a blanket and let the cold tell the truth straight to my bones. I looked at my hands, the map of a life spent turning work into love, and saw how small they seemed against the sky. I thought about the girl he'd been and the man he was, about Madison's smooth smile and Paige's kinder eyes, about promises whispered under a baby vine and the cost of keeping them past their expiration date. The neighborhood settled into its evening chorus dog tags, distant laughter, the bus sighing to a stop, and I measured myself against the quiet. I had become the woman who makes herself less so. Others can stand taller. Shrinking is not the same as loving. Vines know how to climb toward light without apologizing to the shade. I pulled the blanket tighter and said aloud to no one. Enough, not like a verdict, not yet, but like a word trying out its weight in my mouth. Rockefeller Center in spring is a mirror for people who want to be seen. I was cutting through, hugging the shade, when I heard a laugh I would know anywhere. Ryan's warmer than the sun, easy as money you didn't earn. I looked up, and there he was on a terrace. I couldn't afford to breathe near Madison beside him, another couple leaning in 4 glasses bright as coins. He looked relieved, as if the city itself had stamped him approved. I paused where the crowd could hide me and watched him gesture toward the skyline like he owned the angles. Pride rose and stuck. It is a terrible thing to realize your love has been underwriting a life that doesn't remember you at the register. When the server swept by with more, I told myself I was just passing through. But my feet didn't move. I stood as long as it takes to forget you're standing, and only left when the light turned cruel and told the truth about my age. They ordered brunch that costs in adjectives, artisanal, seasonal, pressed, poured. Madison lifted a mimosa, sunlight trapped in a flute, and touched rim to rim like a blessing. The check came. Ryan slid out a golden card as if it were a joke that kept landing. I knew the arithmetic of that glow. One glass on that table equaled a week of my groceries done right. Oranges, good bread, chicken that could stretch the coffee. I don't buy anymore. I wasn't angry he ate well. I was angry that Plenty had trained his manners to skip the memory of how it arrived. Down on the sidewalk, I held my purse closer and felt the pharmacy slip the one for the medicine. I kept postponing press against my palm, like a question I kept refusing to answer. When the laughter spiked, I crossed the street not because of traffic, but because faith without receipts will get you hit. I went home and opened 6 years of statements, the tidy kind I'd always been proud to keep. Teachers keep paper like farmers keep seed. I stacked them by years and used a pencil because some truths need the mercy of erasers. 12 months, 1,000 each, 5 full years. The lead snapped once, then again while I wrote the sum I already feared. 60,000. There was no poetry in it, just a number shaped like a verdict. I wrote it larger the way you write a student's name, so they'll see you're speaking to them. 60,000 bought me arthritis and a quiet I could choke on. 60,000 bought them views and flatware that didn't clink. I thought about all the things that number could have been. The surgery my doctor mentioned, new windows, a trip I'd promised myself and canceled by habit. I ran my finger over the digits until they blurred the way you touch a scar to prove it's yours. I needed something I could verify that didn't depend on anyone's story. So I put on a good sweater, the one that forgives, and took a taxi to their building because answers should sometimes ride up front. The doorman had the kind face of a man who knows the weather and the names of dogs. I asked as if for a friend what 2 bedrooms ran these days. About 2,200, he said, easy as giving directions. He mentioned amenities as if kindness were included with gas. My smile held. Inside my stomach sat down on the floor. I thanked him, wrote the number in my planner like a verse I would need to remember, and walked back to the street where spring had the nerve to be lovely. 2,200, not 3,000. Maybe their unit had a balcony, I argued with myself. Maybe a view charges rent for being looked at. But if that were the truth, why did it feel like it needed to be escorted by silence? I tried the gentle door first. I texted Ryan about a friend from church looking in Chelsea and wondered what the current rates were. Ballpark is fine. He replied hours later with a blur. 3 to 35 depends on floor. Depends is a useful word when you are trying not to land. I asked what he paid exactly. 2 days of nothing, then Madison handles that stuff. That stuff, as if a roof were a hobby, as if numbers, the same ones that decide whether a woman walks with a cane this year, were optional reading. I set the phone down and watched the wisteria move against the glass. It's amazing how much wind you can hear inside a quiet answer. I wanted to give him another chance to tell me the truth. Instead, I gave myself another chance to notice he wasn't. When your child dodges, you pretend it's a dance. When the music stops, you hear the running. Once you smell a lie, you can't unsmell it. It clings to the ordinary like smoke. I caught it on the hem of his compliments, in the way his gratitude had learned to show up empty-handed in the polite distance Madison wrapped around me, like a shawl I hadn't asked to borrow. I replayed conversations and found little edits where a man builds a myth he hopes will stand up in better lighting. I told myself to be fair. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe the doorman had meant last year. Maybe there was a special fee for being the kind of people who get seasonal fruit served in shallow white bowls. But lies make a certain music, and I'd been a teacher too long not to recognize when a paper's voice no longer matched the student. I pressed my fingers to my temples and breathed until the room stopped spinning. I am not a fool, I said aloud, and for a moment believed I might act like it. I tested the feeling by going back there, not to his door this time, but to the lobby, which is its own sort of theater. I stood under the chandelier and watched people come and go with dog leashes and canvas bags that promised farms. No one looked at me long enough to be cruel. They simply didn't see me. Invisibility isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's a mirror. I thought about every time I'd made myself smaller to make someone else's comfort larger about the ways women disappear while setting tables other people eat from. The receptionist offered a brochure as if I were shopping for a future I could afford. I took it to be polite, then sat on a bench outside where the stone is colder than the weather. I didn't cry, I counted buses, and when the counting steadied my hands, I decided I would not make the transfer next month until I'd heard the truth with my own ears in my own kitchen. On the first, I let morning come and go, like a test I chose not to take. I watered the plant, wiped the counter twice, and put my phone face down like a boundary. At 2 o'clock it rang the specific tone he uses a small Pavlovian sting. "Did it hit yet?" he asked. Not hello. "No," I said. Silence widened. "Mom, they're going to charge a late fee. Fees are consequences that look like manners." "I understand," I said. He sighed, the kind that assumes I'll rush. I did not. "I'll handle it," he said finally, as if heroism were being forced upon him by an uncooperative parent. My heart did the old trick where it reached, but my hands stayed where they were. After we hung up, I made tea so fast, the whistle almost covered the sound of my resolve. Almost. Courage, it turns out, is a muscle built from very small refusals, performed exactly on time. He texted an hour later, "Why are you doing this?" I stared at the words like they'd arrived misaddressed. I typed and erased 4 versions of the truth. Then I called. "Come by tonight," I said. "We'll talk." He started to schedule me tomorrow after something before something else. Tonight, I repeated, hearing a steadiness I hadn't rented from anyone, or there's nothing to talk about. Mothers don't often set ultimatums because we know how quickly love will pay them off with interest. But motherhood is not a bank. He agreed, sullen as a boy who's been told to bring the ball back. I set 2 mugs out, not because I thought we'd drink tea, but because objects help people behave. I stacked the statements, the planner, the note, with the doorman's number. Then I sat down and waited in a room that suddenly felt the size of my courage. He arrived late enough to prove a point. He didn't take off his shoes. He didn't kiss my cheek. He looked around like the house had gotten older since last time, which of course it had. "What's going on?" he asked, already defensive, as if honesty were an accusation. I asked what the rent was exactly. 3, he said quick. I let the number sit between us like a third person, and then very quietly placed the doorman's figure on the table. 2 bedrooms are $2,200, I said. That's what he told me. His mouth opened and closed, a fish looking for water that would lie. "Ours is different," he tried. "Balcony, amenities," I nodded. "So tell me the exact number." He adjusted blame like a tie. "Madison handles it." My hands were steady. "So you don't know what you pay to live?" It's cruel sometimes the way a question can corner a man who's been living in a room full of exits. Silence is a shape you can feel. It pressed against the cabinets and slid along the floorboards, a fog that couldn't find a window. He rubbed his jaw, looked at the statements at my planner, open to 12 neat lines of generosity, at the note where I'd written 60,000 a teacher's careful hand. He reached for indignation and found it empty. "I was going to fix it," he said, the future tense doing all the heavy lifting. "I always planned to make it right. The plans people make with your money are always beautiful." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I thought of the 8-year-old under the baby vine and the man on the terrace with a gold card. And I let both truths sit beside me like relatives who don't speak. "Tell me the number," I said once more. Not louder, just older. He didn't. The quiet that followed weighed what I had given and what I would never give again, and it decided for me. No. It was small, almost polite, and it changed the gravity in the room. My spine found itself. I felt taller without moving, like a building that finally realizes it's anchored to bedrock. He blinked as if I'd spoken a foreign language. For years, I'd been fluent in yes and of course. In I'll figure it out. No, I said again, and the second time carried furniture. It slid the old arrangement of our love to the curb. He started to bargain with late fees and promises that always set up camp in the future. I set my hands on the table the way I used to when a class got too loud. Order returned. "We don't pay for lies in this house," I said, and it surprised me that it wasn't anger speaking, but clarity. He left in a weather system of his own making. I washed a single mug and slept like a woman whose name wasn't Aim. In the morning, the wisteria looked taller too. Vines recognize when the trellis stops apologizing. The call came from a number I didn't know. Voice careful like a nurse waking you after surgery. "Mrs. Parker." "This is Paige." I reached for the family tree and found her Madison's younger sister, the one with softer edges. "I hope I'm not overstepping," she said, which is what decent people say before stepping exactly where they should. We met at a coffee shop with mismatched mugs and college kids cramming futures into laptops. She wore a sweater you could trust. We made small talk until kindness became permission. "I think you deserve the whole picture," she said, folding and refolding her napkin. I braced for a new wound and tasted salt before she poured it. It's strange the hush that settles when a stranger arrives as a witness. My hands traitors that they are smoothed the table as if it were a sheet on a hospital bed. "Go ahead," I told her. "Let's have the truth." Madison knew Paige said not unkindly. Not at first, but she's known for 3 years. The air thinned like the elevator had dropped a floor without telling me. 3 years long enough to send a thank you, long enough to make a meal, and bring it in a dish I wouldn't get back. She told me at a family dinner Paige went on eyes steady. "Said you helped with the rent. Said it was only right, only right." The phrase sat down in my lap and stared. I couldn't find a place to put my hands. I remembered the silk robe, the door that closed softly, the bagels cooling in my arms. I remembered how invisibility had started to feel like wallpaper. Always the rarely noticed part of the decor. "Why are you telling me?" I asked. "Because I was raised by a woman who taught me that silence can be complicity," she said. Bless that mother. Bless every woman who breaks the family code of looking away. I went home and set a second place at the table, then took it away again. Payment for silence is the most expensive kind. It buys you nothing and costs you the self that notices. I replayed holidays, the gifts wrapped in neutral paper so I wouldn't embarrass them. The photos cropped carefully so I looked less authentic, more timeless, which is code for erasing the year on your curtains. 3 years of her knowing turned my generosity into tribute. I had been underwriting a pageant where my name was not on the program. Rage arrived late to the party, but dressed beautifully. Still, it didn't scorch. It clarified. If she knew and he knew and I knew, but pretended I didn't. What we had wasn't a secret. It was a system. Systems don't change because you wish. They change because you pull a wire. I took out a pen, not the red one for grading the good black one, and started to write the letter I owed myself. Dear son. I began because names can bite when overused. I wrote slowly the way you do when you want each word to be a rung on a ladder out of somewhere. I didn't list the dollars. I listed the weather winters. I kept the heat lower summers. I kept the windows open. Springs when I walked past the pool and waved at the life I wasn't living. I told him what love is not. It is not an invoice, a habit, a hush. I told him what I was retiring from the ministry of making myself small so other people could feel tall. I said I would always be his mother and never again his mattress. I wished him enough discomfort to grow and enough grace to keep from breaking. I signed it with my whole name, the one I had before anyone needed me. When I folded the letter, it made a sound like new paper. New paper is a promise. I sealed it before doubt could breathe. Chelsea has that particular mailbox gloss, the kind that turns even apology into an aesthetic. I slipped the envelope in, heard the tinny swallow, and felt something unhook behind my ribs. I didn't ring the bell. Closure doesn't have to be a performance. The lobby smelled like lemon and decision. I walked back out into a city that has never once cared who is carrying what. A taxi hissed by. A couple argued softly about Basil. Somewhere a dog insisted on joy. I stood at the curb long enough to notice I was standing, no rush, no errands, no first of the month drum in my chest. and then I crossed without checking whether anyone approved. It is a young woman's sport to seek permission. I had graded my last paper on that subject. The wisteria would need water later. I would give it freely with both hands to something that climbed without making me smaller. He came by 2 days later, the storm already inside him. He stepped into my kitchen and the room shrank to the size of his frustration. "Why would you do that?" he asked, meaning the no. Meaning the letter, meaning the part where I stopped sponsoring his illusion. "Because truth cannot live on a payment plan," I said. He told me they'd fought. He told me Madison said she didn't sign up for this, the great horror of reality arriving without a bow. He told me she might go stay with her parents for a while, and the word stretched its legs like a cat that knows the bed is hers. He tried out anger, tried on woundedness, tried to return the item of responsibility with no receipt. I made tea because heat helps conversations where pride is frozen. If a marriage ends when numbers do, I said it was already hungry. He looked at me like I'd switched languages again. Maybe I had. I'd finally chosen mine. Honesty is the foundation, not the enemy, I told him, and I watched the sentence test its weight in the room. He paced. He wanted a loophole, a scaffolding of exceptions we could climb together to get above the truth. I kept my feet on the floor. You and I built a house where the bills were love and the walls were silence. I said, it looked pretty until the first hard wind. He accused me of timing, of cruelty, of choosing pride over family. People reach for those words when their mirrors start working. I offered him a chair. He didn't sit. "I can't lose her," he said, like a boy who's misplaced a sweater. "Then keep her," I said, "but keep her with the truth." He shook his head, and the gesture said more than his mouth ever had. I poured the tea. He didn't touch it. "Some comforts you must pick up yourself." "Just a few more months," he asked, finally, the way a man asks for a loan on a habit, "to get through this rough patch." Rough patches are where character shows its face. "No," I said, and I felt the word build a porch I could stand on. Sell what you own that owns you. Move where your paycheck fits. Eat what your pride can afford. He flinched, then went quiet, as if listening to instructions for a machine he'd never thought he'd have to operate. "That's easy for you to say," he muttered. I smiled not sweetly. "It's easy for me to model," I said. "I've been doing it for decades." He hated that truth dressed as example is an unflattering outfit. I thought of every young man I'd taught how to write a thesis claim, evidence, conclusion. Claim your life, I told him. Find evidence you can afford. Draw a conclusion you can live with. He left carrying his own weather again. It didn't take long for gravity to collect what belonged to it. The SUV went first, gleaming to the end like a bad idea in a tuxedo. He texted a photo of the keys on a counter. "Sold," he wrote. I sent back a heart and the kind of silence that approves without applause. Next came the move, cardboard boxes sweating. Truth Elise with fewer zeros and more humility. He didn't ask me to help lift. Pride can be useful in small, muscular ways. He called from a room that echoed. "It's smaller," he said. "It's mine," he said. Two sentences can be the same length and live in different universes. I heard pots clank footsteps of friends who show up when there's nothing to photograph laughter that sounds like work being done. I slept better that night, not because his struggle made me happy, but because struggle honestly chosen is a kind of healing you can hear through walls. With the first of the month money still in my account, I went to the pharmacy and handed over the prescription I'd been carrying like a secret. "We can do a 3-month supply," the tech said, as if abundance had always been an option. I cried a little, which is to say, I came back to myself. The pills didn't fix everything, but they buttered the hinge. Stairs negotiated. Sleep returned like a cat that forgives without explanation. I bought strawberries and the good coffee and walked home the long way because the world looks different when pain is not narrating it. I scheduled physical therapy and wrote it in my planner like a date with someone I loved. On the first day, the therapist asked what my goals were. "To bend without bargaining," I said, and she smiled like I'd told a joke and a prayer. Healing is expensive, so is pretending you don't need it. The quiet after a storm is when you hear the house talk. Mine told me truth in the clicks and sighs of old wood. I woke before dawn, made eggs, and listened to the kettle sing a song that wasn't covering any panic. The wisteria brushed the window, polite as always, and I realized I'd mistaken politeness for worth for too long. Women like me are trained to equate endurance with love and silence with grace, but love speaks, grace moves. I stood at the sink and watched the sky get brave. Somewhere Ryan was figuring out a grocery list without someone else's dignity on it. Somewhere Madison was practicing her face in a mirror that no longer owed her anything. I pressed my palm flat on the counter, felt the cool certainty of laminate, and told the room, I deserve love that doesn't cost me myself. The room-wise's kitchens are said nothing, and I believed it. Sundays learned a new shape. He started showing up with a brown paper bag and no agenda, the steam from a fresh sesame bagel fogging the air between us. Just enough to make room for gentleness. He didn't hover near the refrigerator like an old habit. He asked, do you want to split this? And meant equal. We ate at the small table that has survived every season of us talking about ordinary things. Leaky faucets, a neighbor's new puppy, the way the wisteria has learned to shade the kitchen just so. He helped me replace a stubborn light bulb without turning it into a hero's quest. When he left, the chair across from me did not ache. There were no lists pressed under my palm, no calendar math ticking like a meter. I rinsed the knife and found myself humming. Women of my age will understand. Peace is not silence. It is the presence of what you need and the absence of what takes you. The bag held 2 bagels. He left the second on the counter. For tomorrow, he said. Diane took one look at my lipstick and laughed, the kind that wipes dust off a room. There she is, she said, arms out, my name, wrapped in joy instead of worry. We sat by the diner window, and she ordered pie without consulting her conscience. You look taller, she said, and I told her it's amazing what standing on your own decisions will do for posture. I confessed to the pills and the progress to the Sunday bagels and the absence of invoices disguised as affection. She teared up the good kind and clinked her coffee mug against my water glass, like we were christening a boat. Ellen's back, she declared to no one and everyone, and for a second I forgave every year I'd been missing. We traded teacher stories until the waitress had to come twice to ask about refills. Friendship, when it's right, is a mirror that remembers you even when you don't. I painted the living room the color of early peaches, a soft courage that makes morning behave. We moved the couch to where the light tells better truths and retired a chair that knew too much about waiting. The wisteria, punctual as prayer, exploded into purple, like the yard had decided to applaud. I opened the windows and let the vine perfume my housekeeping dusting, sweeping the quiet choreography of claiming space. A woman came to fix the stubborn window latch and left with a bag of cuttings and a recipe for chili. The house felt generous again. I framed 2 photographs, one of a very small boy with orange juice on his chin, one of a very tired woman smiling into a future she couldn't see, but chose anyway. When the paint dried, it looked like forgiveness that had somewhere to sit. I stood in the doorway and nodded. Rooms know when you've decided to live in them. On a Tuesday that didn't ask for drama, Ryan leaned back in his chair and admitted he could breathe again. It's strange, he said, buttering a bagel like he had discovered thrift could be tender. How quiet my mind is without all the bill juggling. He talked about a Saturday spent walking instead of shopping, about a dinner cooked for a friend that didn't need a photo to exist, about sleeping through the night because there was nothing to outrun at breakfast. I thought success felt like more, he said. Turns out, it feels like enough. I watched his shoulders settle into a shape I recognized from years ago, before life asked him to perform so hard he forgot how to inhabit himself. He didn't ask me for anything, which is a kind of gift. You have to grow to give. I poured us coffee and let the steam carry away a grief I'd been saving for the day he said exactly this. Madison disappeared from the internet like a theater going dark between shows. No brunches, no sunsets framed by a wristwatch, no captions performing gratitude. Paige texted now and then small updates with the humility of someone who has learned that fine is a full sentence. I didn't stalk, I didn't cheer. I lit a candle at church and asked for the kind of mercy that teaches. Not the punishing kind life will take care of consequences without my suggestions, but the merciful kind that lets a person see where they took a wrong turn and gives them knees soft enough to kneel and ask for directions. I hoped she found work that fed more than her reflection. I hoped she met mornings that arrived without performance. I hoped she forgave the girl who believed applause could anchor a house. The world is hard enough without women sharpening our teeth on each other. I set the candle down and let it say what I couldn't without choosing sides. The letter came on a Tuesday, apologies inked in a hand that tried to be brave. She called me Mrs. Parker, and I kept it that way, a respectful distance that told the truth about where we had never met. She wrote about therapy, about learning the difference between curated and cared for, about shame that doesn't swallow you if you let it teach. She did not ask for absolution. She offered regret like a dish you don't expect back. I read it twice, then slid it into the drawer where my important papers live. The will, the birth certificate, the old notes from a boy who promised to take care of me. I didn't write back because forgiveness had already happened in a quiet room months ago when I decided not to hate a stranger for acting out a script she'd been handed. Some letters close accounts. This one closed a door gently, the way you do when a child is finally sleeping. He asked if I wanted to meet someone. I recognized the cautious brightness in his voice, the tone a man uses when he hopes his mother can make room without redecorating the house. Hannah Green arrived with a tote bag full of teacher things, a paperback with dog-eared corners stickers for good essays, a pen that actually writes. She listened more than she spoke and laughed from the belly, unembarrassed to be pleased by small things. When she said my chili tasted like a snow day, I loved her a little. She didn't rescue the conversation when it got quiet. She set it down and let it rest. Ryan watched me watch her and did not over-explain. We cleared the table together, 3 people who know how to carry plates without turning it into choreography. There was no ornate gratitude, no performance of blessed. Just a simple thank you warmed by sincerity and the dishwasher humming like a promise no one needed to underwrite. On the 3rd Sunday after Hannah left with a Tupperware that would actually return, Ryan stayed. He stood by the wisteria and told me the story of himself like an adult. No revisions, no soundtrack, no discount on the parts that don't sell. He didn't flinch when he said the number didn't dodge. When he described the terrace, brunch didn't edit out. The moment he watched me stand in my own kitchen and ask for the truth. I did that, he said. I made you smaller. He didn't ask for a pardon. He did the holier thing and asked for nothing. I'm learning to live inside the borders of what's real, he said. And I thought about how many students I'd coached to stop writing around their thesis and finally write it. I put my hand on his cheek, the way you check for fever and find only weather. Good, I said. It was the most expensive word either of us had learned this year. The wedding fit in a garden and in a sentence love honestly. No string quartet to drown out promises, just a friend with a guitar, and vows that sounded like 2 people standing in the same room at the same time. I sat in the front row because they wanted me there, not because I had paid some secret invoice. Hannah pressed a small bouquet into my hands, as if it were a relay baton and I were trusted to keep pace. Ryan's eyes found mine the way they used to at school plays, as if I were the necessary landmark. After cake on paper plates, he fixed a loose chair leg without anyone announcing it, then went back to laughing in a voice that had nothing to prove. I drove home with petals on my skirt and the kind of quiet that doesn't ache. The wisteria was lit by porch light when I pulled in a soft crown on a house that had survived beautifully being told the truth. Pick a place, he said a week later, a travel brochure peeking out of his pocket like a flag. Anywhere you want. I thought of the trip I'd postponed a dozen times because $1,000 needed to be brave somewhere else. Key West, I said, and my voice didn't tremble. He grinned, the complicated old boy visible under the careful new man, and started listing dates instead of obstacles. We planned without bargaining with fate. Flights, a motel with clean towels, and no pretense, the best pie, a sunset that won't care who paid for it. I did not apologize for wanting the window seat. I did not offer to stay home if work got busy. He did not offer to upgrade. He offered to carry the lighter suitcase. I went to bed that night and dreamed of water that doesn't owe anyone anything, of walking into the ocean as if it were a room I'd finally been invited to enter. The news came on a Sunday, so perfect it felt rehearsed. He stood in the doorway with a bouquet from the farmer's market sunflowers, practical and bright, and the kind of smile that doesn't require anyone else to lose for him to win. "Mom," he said, and then he didn't need to say the rest, because joy has a posture. We cried and laughed, and cried again, the way bodies do when they can't decide which blessing to honor first. "You'll be close," Hannah said later, "if you want to be." She spoke like a woman who knows the difference between help and erasure. I imagined a small hand finding mine, and the wisteria throwing shade over a stroller and a rocking chair that remembers how to hold. This time no one would be asked to vanish so someone else could shine. This time love would show its receipts, naps, soups, rides to the doctor. Boundaries with bows on them. "We're ready," I said, and meant all of us. Karma isn't a hammer, it's a mirror. It doesn't strike, it shows. When I finally said no, the glass cleared. I saw a woman who had mistaken endurance for love and silence for grace. A son who'd been rehearsing a version of himself that needed my invisibility to survive. The mirror didn't punish us. It told the truth until we adjusted our faces to fit it. Saying no saved us both. It returned my body to me, my knees, my breath, my mornings, and it returned my son to himself. A man who can carry his own weight without setting it on my chest. Boundaries didn't shrink my love. They gave it borders so it could hold water. I used to think sacrifice was the only language mothers were allowed to speak. Now I know love has grammar nouns like honesty, verbs like listen, punctuation like rest. If you're standing at a sink with your hands in dishwater and doubt in your mouth, hear me, you're not cruel for choosing truth. Put the towel down, say the small word that lifts a house, then watch the mirror do its gentle work.